This is Scott Richmond.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 1015 FM. Good morning, Arnie Sherman.
Well, there's no place like home for the holidays.
I'll say.
So how you doing on this holiday week?
Well, you know how we're doing. We have terrible roads where we live.
We have horrible weather. It's in between freezing and freezing everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've been eating like pigs.
Who are these garbage people that can't get up our hill?
I don't know. We don't want to criticize them because they might be a sponsor at some point. But we have the kind of show that I think our listeners need to pay attention to for this holiday season. You know, we're ripping presents apart and drinking and eating and visiting relatives that you don't like in many cases. So we're going to celebrate and talk about marijuana today on our show.
Good.
You know, it's the perfect holiday gift, I think, or the perfect holiday treat. And as you probably know, it's been around since the 3rd century BC, the 3rd millennium.
Wow.
You know, and 50% of Americans have tried it. And men are twice as likely as women to use it, believe it or not. And people between the ages
not the
of
women
18,
I know.
No, well, I'll have to introduce you to a few. And the 18 to 29 crowd is 6 times more likely to use it than people kind of over 65. And now we have 28 states plus the District of Columbia where it's either legal or it can be used for medical and medicinal purposes. You know, so while we like to get some titillation about talking about marijuana, more than half the country you can have access to it.
Sure.
And as you remember growing up, there used to be a lot of melodramatics about smoking marijuana, right?
Yeah.
There was the Reefer Madness movie.
Well, that's before my time, Arnie.
That was a cult favorite. They didn't have
You're right.
They didn't have shows in school about using marijuana. I remember vividly
Not really.
Things like beside Reefer Madness, the Devil Weed, and my favorite Reefer Boy.
Reefer Boy, right. I remember that.
It was shown in school to try to keep you from.
By the time it hit my era, though,
everybody was smoking, including
but
teachers.
Reefer Madness and Reefer Boy were kind of kitsch and cult. But I know when they were originally introduced to the public, they were serious.
Oh, they definitely were serious. In the
serious
30s,
deal.
They were trying to keep people because they thought it was a road to further degradation.
Sure.
You know, like you could almost change the old song, Broadway show. You remember Music Man?
Yeah.
You know, either you're closing your eyes to a situation you do not wish to acknowledge, or you're not aware of the caliber of disaster indicated by the presence of marijuana in your community. That was the kind of message, right?
Is that right? That's a great soliloquy, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. You should have seen that.
That was a good movie.
Your Hamlet.
That was my Hamlet. But there are some consequences of marijuana. I mean, it's clear that outside of alcohol, smoking pot is involved in more car accidents than any other drug.
Is that right?
You know, people probably shouldn't be, smoking and driving. Right. And I don't believe it's a gateway drug, but we can talk about that during the show with our guest. We have Dylan Matteson here, who is the proprietor of one of our medical marijuana dispensaries here in Missoula, Olympus Incendias, which it translated means...
Yeah, what does that mean?
It means fire from the heavens or fire from the gods.
Okay.
And Dylan is going to be here talking about... We have a very checkered medical marijuana history. As you probably know, 2004... The legislature here passed medical marijuana.
Right.
And then 7 years later, the legislature tried to kill it. They passed a bill to basically remove medical marijuana from sale, and Governor Brian Schweitzer at the time vetoed it.
Is that right?
Yep. Then the legislature came back, and gutted the bill.
Right.
And then we just had to have Well, 182 just was up this legislative cycle and this voting cycle, and it passed, and it's back in now. But it had some wording problems, so we do not have, the full operating dispensaries that are allowable by law probably until June or July. But we'll find out more from Dylan when he gets here.
I'm looking forward to speaking to him, Arnie. This is a great guest.
By the way, as we talk about holiday gifts, there are 8 states where you can gift marijuana.
What states are those?
Those states, I knew you were going to ask me.
Trying to figure out if I have any family.
Colorado, Massachusetts, Nevada, California, Maine, Alaska, Oregon, and D.C.
Wow.
You can gift marijuana to folks.
Well, let's give the gift to our listeners of Dylan Matteson, right?
Good. He'll be joining us shortly.
Okay, you're listening to What Do You Know on KGVO, brought to you in part by Don Maddox, Glacier Sotheby International Realty. We'll be back right after these words. Okay, we are back with What Do You Know, brought to you in part by Don Maddox, Glacier Sotheby's International Realty here in Missoula.
Dylan, welcome to the show. Before you came in, we were talking a little bit about this stop and start, foot on the gas and foot on the brake history of medical marijuana here in Montana. So why don't you recap? I did a little bit of it, I was probably wrong. Kind of where we were and where we are now here.
Well, in 2004, Montanans voted in an initiative that allowed medical marijuana to be used in Montana for people that needed it. Somewhere along the lines, legislation didn't find it as interesting as hunting or one of those adventures and kind of kiboshed us a little bit.
But at that point, once it passed, as I recall, there were maybe as many as 15,000 people who had gotten permission to do it.
I think at that point in time, yeah, there was a pretty large wave of people that had gotten their cards.
Right.
15,000 is a pretty good estimate.
And to get the card for our listeners, they had to go get a physician to approve it, right?
Correct. And at that point in time, there was actually some probably people that using some physicians that were bending the rules and probably made it a little less appealing.
More lenient.
Yes, and made it less appealing to the public in general.
Right.
So how many doctors are in town that were able to actually go and diagnose?
At that point in time, there was a loophole in the law that actually allowed doctors from out of state to come in as well.
Oh, really?
And so it was decently Wild Westish.
It was.
Got it.
People would come in a doctor in a van and sign
correct.
people up.
And charge.
Or even FaceTiming doctors and stuff like that, where you actually didn't even see a doctor personally. You actually went and saw a doctor.
So it might be fair to say that things went a little beyond what was anticipated when the voters passed it.
Correct. The one thing that I think Montana repeatedly makes the mistake in is not letting anybody that knows anything be involved with helping make the rules.
Sure.
Which makes it a kind of a difficult process.
That's not good.
So it passed. It got gutted.
It got gutted completely. They actually said at one point in time that we should not be allowed to advertise. We should not be allowed to service more than 3 patients, and we should not be allowed to accept any monetary anything in exchange for our goods or services.
So they gutted it, and so we just had a bill that passed this past November, overwhelmingly, right?
It actually got even more argumentative than that. We had a really high-paid lawyer that went in and had some stuff overturned by a judge because that's it wasn't very constitutional for them to decide that.
At that point in time.
Mm-hmm. And so a judge actually decided that it was unconstitutional, and then he actually allowed us to do some other stuff until another vote could come through.
Right, and we had the vote, and it was overwhelming support.
That time, it actually the vote that we're in right now is actually the vote that happened before this recent vote.
Right.
That actually gave us strict regulations as well, and kind of led into people just not wanting to even be a part of the program anymore, stuff along that nature. They definitely did what they intended because they had legislation. The bill was written really poorly. Right. So when people went to vote, a lot of people didn't know what they were voting for and actually voted the wrong way in that instance.
Sure.
And then we actually ended up with laws that, again, weren't written by anybody that had anything to do with what was going on.
And so when the bill passed this November, there was a glitch in it that said...
I don't really think that was a glitch. I think that's actually a part of the process that needs to be there. Same thing, have people not making...
Decision, don't know much about it,
making the decisions. Right. And so based on that, I think they wrote that in there so they had some time to get their poo in a group.
Right.
And at that point in time, enough people along with us were frustrated that they actually filed with a judge again and said, this is not right. We should not have to wait till June. We all voted this in. Let's do this right now. And he decided a little more than a week ago that that was okay and that we should go ahead and involve everybody again. Doctors are back in town. Doctors are able to listen to stuff.
So what's the industry in Montana going to look like when this all? I mean, 6 months from now, what's it going to look like here? How's it going to work?
6 months from now, I anticipate regulation. Probably not as strict as some of the other states, but we will have regulation. We will have testing involved. We will have people that come into the places that are doing this and actually doing some sort of quality control check. None of this has ever happened at any point in time. It still leaves it a really Wild West industry. On top of that, us as a provider should have to pay some sort of fee. They actually charge me less as a provider than they do me as a patient.
Really? That's
Is
kind
that
of
right?
odd. Well, look what happens in Colorado, how much tax money they've generated.
Correct. And Washington.
So the governor here also wants to impose a tax on marijuana sales.
And I think it's probably not the worst idea. At that point in time, we've been down such a bumpy road, and I've put on the fanciest clothes I have, and I've sat down with these senators and asked them and talked to them, and they really do not care about us in any way, shape, or form.
What do you think that's about, though? Is it just an immediate disregard or they don't believe in it because it goes against what they believe their morals?
They actually laugh at our revenue generated. They seriously do.
Really? So they judge it based on that?
The amount of out-of-state hunting and the amount of crazy stuff that goes on with fish, wildlife, and parks and all that stuff is really what they focus on. So when we're done with all of our voting and we're done talking about our initiative and all that stuff, most of the people involved with the medical marijuana will leave the Capitol building. I find frustration in this and why they won't listen to us. So I actually hang out afterwards and see what they talk about after we leave. And after we leave, they actually don't talk about us at all. They don't care about us in any way, shape, or form. We can put as many people in wheelchairs in front of them as we want, and they do not care.
Because there's not a revenue impact that they understand.
Correct.
And relate
Right.
to.
Our senators are elderly, to be nice about it. We have some senators that have been around for a very long time. It's very, very hard to teach them new ways and new technology and new medicines and get them to believe in stuff that some people might.
So you're committed, as I know, to really the medicinal use of this and how sophisticated that has become.
I've seen people diagnosed with terminal cancer, given 5-6 months to live and live 5 years. I've seen their doctors actually have conversations and want to talk to me because of this.
I've seen people who have had advanced Parkinson's disease use a certain strain, and they seem to be markedly improved as a result.
My wife's grandfather was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Has already ended it. Guys, you shouldn't even worry about it. You're 80 years old, dude. You don't have to worry about nothing. Have a nice time. We'll give you as much painkillers as you want. You're pretty much dead. And he calls my wife up crying. And he's like, this guy told me I'm dying. And I was like,
right.
You're probably not healthy, sir, but there are ways to do it without doing what they would want you to do and whatever else. And he actually got on a pretty strict cannabis regimen, and that gentleman lived for 3 years with pancreatic cancer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And pancreatic cancer is
Oh, I know all about it.
How much money does Steve Jobs have?
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't matter. So question, do the laws in Montana afford you as the provider with all the technology and formats and media that you need to be able to treat people as effectively as you'd like?
No, the few professionals seek knowledge on their own. Same thing. I really look forward to some kind of program like that being in effect. Right now, the closest thing we have to any kind of even
education.
Camaraderie,
Right.
well, even a camaraderie is the MTCIA. That's who raises the funding for the lawyer. That's who helps us keep all of our stuff moving in the right direction. It's really just a group of.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. One of my friends is a guy named Matt Leo, and is Matt part of the MTCIA? Is that out of Helena? Not out of Helena, but it's a consultancy that runs it.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
To a certain extent, yes. I'm not sure. I've not met Matt Leo myself.
Okay.
I kind of stay in the backdrop more than anything. I think that this time around it should be different. I think this time around they need to have more focus on everything.
And you will be running a dispensary, right?
We've had a dispensary for quite a few years. I've been a provider in Montana since they called us caregivers. I've been through it every time they shut us down, tell us we can have 3 people, whatever. I've sacrificed every dollar I have to keep the shop open for these people that need it, and it gets to be wearing, but you really believe. I grew up in Montana. I believe in Montana is a good place. I believe that even though some of these people don't know what they're doing when they're making some of the decisions they're making, that I truly believe Montana is good, and we have.
Well, the challenge we kind of have here is you can drive 2 hours up the road to Spokane and be in Washington State, where it's not only medicinal marijuana is legal, cannabis, but recreational, and you can walk into any of the shops there and get a full array of what's available in the marketplace. Correct?
Correct. I think Montana should not necessarily see that as a challenge, but as more of a threat to our income and our way of life. That's the one thing these senators and legislatures do not understand. The people that use cannabis on an everyday basis use cannabis, whether or not they agree to it or whether or not they'll help
like
us
it,
get
whether
it.
they want it. It's real.
It's real. So these dollars are generated. These dollars are allocated to what they're going to, no matter what. At some point in time, the demand has to come. The supply has to come from somewhere.
One of the things that I found interesting when I went into one of the cannabis shops in Washington State, just as an observer, of course, to see what it looked like, is that it was fairly sophisticated in terms of the kind of strain of product to be matched with the kind of ailment. I mean, even though it was recreational as well.
Correct.
They had charts that said if you had Parkinson's disease or cancer or back pain, there's a particular strain that could match up with that.
We just call it recreational because too many doctors have too many limits on everything. Like, it's a naturopathic medicine. You should be able to seek what you need from it. And yes, these strains are so specific in what they're healing. It's kind of mind-boggling for a doctor or somebody that's studied something like that all of their life to comprehend that a plant of the same genus can do so many different things by just having a little bit of a hybrid to it.
I mean, it was amazing. I mean, and I've heard from people as well, you can get pot that will basically affect you from the neck down and not give you the munchies or all of the things that stereotypically that are associated with cannabis use can be completely eliminated. They can be just a targeted, pain,
or anxiety, or I can't sleep,
insomnia.
Each strain definitely has its own things.
And it's not a fantasy. I mean, that's real. It's not just marketing. I mean, it really does do that. And then they have the edibles, and for people who don't want to smoke and inhale, they have
waxes,
lozenges,
oil,
and all that sort of stuff.
And all the way down to rub it on you. The patches are becoming more popular right now. Any of the lotions, stuff like that.
So will we have all of that here for people that are that have cards?
It's honestly coming down to the making the rules process. The DPHHS people are going to be part of the process and part of the people who are making the rules. I do believe that there will be some lotions and some other stuff like that allowed, but it has to be written in. That's where That's where Colorado and Washington and places like that get by on these things. They actually write them in. They have regulations for this. They have inspectors that come in and make sure, like, these people that are creating waxes, those are illegal most of the country. You go to Colorado, there is specific rooms that are licensed to create it.
Yeah.
There are certain people that are known for doing it better than other people. It is literally a science.
So let's do a quick ID. You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO. Our guest is Dylan Matteson from Olympus, Incendias. And we are brought to you in part by Don Maddox, Glacier Sotheby International Realty.
So Dylan, how did you get into this?
I was volunteered. I have a natural knack for things. Back in the very beginnings of the program, you actually didn't have to say that you wanted to be a caregiver yourself. Somebody actually could put your name on a piece of paper, and randomly I get a piece of paper in the mail one day with my friend's name on it. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm helping you, my friend." And I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're the most broken person I know, and you're better at most things than anybody else I know." He's like, "I need you to help me get my medicine and make this right." And I actually fought it. I fought it for a long time. I fought it for like another 6 months. And then by the time I actually went and got my own card, I had 7 or 8 of my friends who was already volunteered and put my name on their own stuff.
let me ask you a question, Dylan. So two things. One is if you don't have all the, as the rules are being written, who's writing the rules, right?
Right now, all the rules so far have been written by legislation.
State legislators.
Basically,
So people that don't really understand it.
Correct. We'll come in and we'll create something. We get the initiative gone, and then it becomes a Senate bill at some point in time. The Senate bill takes over. The Senate bill is what overrides most of our stuff that we had written in our original initiative. So then we have to. It's literally like playing a tennis match. Then we come back with another initiative, and we're like, these rules should be
by
this.
the time it gets to the floor or wherever, it is so watered down and so.
Well, it gets changed. The last time there was law,
right,
and then law has to have implementation mechanism attached to it, and that's where you can deviate substantially from what the intent of the original bill was.
So how did they overturn the last? Law that you could have.
They didn't overturn it.
Or how did they poke holes into it and gut it to where you could not, as a dispensary, you could only serve 3 patients at any given time?
It was actually written into a funky Senate bill, and some miswording on the ballot had some people voting not necessarily the way that they thought it was based on the wording on the bill.
Really?
Correct.
But even when it was law, there were bills pushed to restrict it, to change it, to minimize it, cut it completely. And the one to cut it completely, Governor Schweitzer vetoed.
Correct.
In 2011.
Correct.
And then they came back and gutted it as much as they could afterwards.
Got it.
Administratively, they gutted it, not by referendum or not by vote, but just by administrative protocol.
So everything we're really everything we're talking about with respect to the prescription of medicinal marijuana or cannabis for treating illness or ailments of any types of disease or whatever, that's one thing. But then in our state, there are businesses that are growing medical marijuana and cannabis for out-of-state dispensary. Isn't that not true?
Whatever they're doing is definitely not legal.
Yeah, you can't transport across state lines.
You're actually not even in the state of Montana allowed to share caregiver to caregiver. A lot of people like to step in gray areas and stuff like that, but this law is written in. We're actually
one of the things they did before you got here, Scott. For example, you had a bill that there were 13 to 15,000 people getting marijuana,
right.
And there were numbers of dispensaries all over the place.
And doctors crazy.
Right.
And, yeah.
So one of the legislative things they did, because they didn't think that it should be that way, was to say you can only give a dispensary can only give to 3 people.
Is that right?
Yeah. So how can you run a business with 3 people?
But New Jersey, right? There are medicinal marijuana there are growers in New Jersey.
Right.
Okay, and they distribute all over. I guess they distribute to pharmacies,
right?
But not to dispensaries because there are not necessarily medical marijuana dispensaries
because of the way their laws are written. That is correct, and so there's even companies in Colorado that full on blow it up. They're legalized. They've got it all marketed. They've got all their packaging down. They've got stuff like that. I've seen some of their packages in other places in the country. How they get there, I don't know. I do know that transporting stuff like that across state lines is not legal. Growing stuff for other people is not legal.
Outside of the 28 states where medical or recreational is legal, there are a number of states now that have decriminalized.
Correct.
Which means it's still against the law, but they don't do much about it. So, I mean, you're going to take there's calculated risks. If I drive my product from, let's say, New Jersey to Colorado where it's legal, I might be able to get there somehow by going through states where I won't be able to be incarcerated as a result.
Nowadays, you could actually say, I'm allowed to have this much medical marijuana over here. Right. I'm allowed to have this much medical marijuana over here. Hello, Mr. Airlines. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm taking. This is where I'm disclosing.
Right.
They will actually seriously call up the other end, make sure this is okay. Check your credentials, make sure that you're not lying about any of this stuff,
right?
And you will hop on your plane with your medicine these days.
Yeah, I mean, things are rapidly changing because, as we already alluded to, more than half the country has it as either recreational or legal.
So, like Washington, you can be just a grower,
Right.
or you can be a dispensary owner, or you can be what they call like a packaging shipping processor. So you can be any of those different scenarios.
For transport within intrastate.
Correct.
Got it.
When you get to Montana, I am the only person allowed to grow the cannabis for my patients. I'm the only person allowed to dispense it, and I'm only allowed to have plants based on how many patients I have.
But if you have a medical marijuana card in Montana and you can grow at your own dwelling, you can do that, correct?
You actually have to state that you are growing to them, and you actually register as your own provider at that point.
Right, so your own provider. That was the loophole.
Correct. And those are the only, if you're just your own provider, those are the only people that will not have to submit their fingerprints to a federal background check. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, we actually submit our fingerprints to the FBI in Montana to be a part of the program.
Is that right? Okay.
So while they are writing and crafting what the future is going to look like, do you have any guess of how it's going to end up? I don't. It's not going to end up the way it was, in 2010.
I can't have any guesses, but I can have, I guess, some thoughts towards the whole events and how the events have unfolded before.
Right.
The fact that they're talking about taxing us instead of nulling and voiding us is a super, super big deal.
It's a step in the right direction.
It definitely is. For anybody that's sad about the fact that our patients will be taxed, I encourage them to really look at the big picture, and this makes them part of the process.
Right.
If you are legally doing what you're supposed to be doing in the state of Montana and you're following all your rules, you technically can't get in trouble, not even by the federal government, because you've submitted your fingerprints to them. And if you're following all these rules and you've done that, at some point in time, you could even bring them in as being an accomplice in your crime.
So is everything, until the federal government really gets involved with this and makes it a Schedule 1?
It is a Schedule 1.
So right now, they consider it like anything you could get while you're dying in your bed in the hospital. Like, they consider it like Demerol, like morphine, like cocaine.
So
like,
what's the
It's a Schedule 1. It's a Schedule 1 felony to have it in your possession by the federal government.
Okay.
And
So
And that supersedes state law.
everything. So until that's removed, then any of this intrastate, interstate, whatever it is not going to happen.
Well,
Correct.
we had a period of time here, as Dylan knows, where there were dispensaries in complete compliance with the state rules, and they got raided by the feds.
Correct.
People got arrested and went to jail, went to prison.
And Jeff Sessions, as our potential attorney general, we're not going to see much federal work being done with this while he's in charge.
Probably not, but you never know. He might just take it off the plate.
You think so?
You never know.
And
they're so unpredictable that to figure out what the Trump administration is going to do, we're going to need a lot of pot in order to contemplate what the outcome we might be seeing.
One of the biggest things that happened last year was the Medicaid did a study. They actually did studies in the states that they legalized it in, and did dollar-to-dollar amounts on the millions and millions of dollars that they are saving by not writing prescription pills and by not having people in here for false reasons and stuff of that nature. So just the dollars that it's saving the American people is going to be, it's going to be what brings it federal. That's what.
What if you're a typical patient that's taking it for medicinal use? How much is he going to spend a month
taking it for medicinal use?
It depends. A lot of I have one person that does just edibles. That's all he does. Figure in the $100 range for a month.
Right?
Correct.
If you just had some smokables.
I have some people with
flowers,
some flowers, and I have some people with some freshly broken things, backs, legs, stuff of that nature. When you're fighting real pain and not taking painkillers, I've seen people use up to $200 a week.
Right.
Wow.
But somebody who's I'm trying to figure out the comparison between taking a prescription.
Oh, sure.
So if somebody has chronic back pain, and this alleviates the pain, this is replacing prescriptions. That kind of person is spending.
A lot of the times, those are the people that are hard to get over, because some of the prescription plans and stuff like that have such great coverage. You can get 100 pills for like $15.
Right.
That stuff's going to last you all month for $15.
Right.
The people are really finding out that the cannabis doesn't have the side effects. It doesn't have the negative downfalls to the positive.
Right.
There's so many more positives when you're using the cannabis compared to the downfalls of it. That's where people almost think that we're lying to a certain extent.
Sure.
Everything I've ever taken has side effects.
Right, and there's disbelief. Here's a good story. So I have a family member who unfortunately had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, young person, and he went about on a very strong regimen of medical marijuana, and it got him through all of the problems relative to the chemotherapy and all the treatments. And now, knock on wood, he's cancer-free and has been for 4 years. But as a testament to his belief in how powerful medicinal marijuana is, he became a grower. And he is one of probably a rising star in that community in terms of people seek his expertise. His expertise to grow. And so talk about a real, a real success story and a testament.
And an inspiration at that point, too.
Sure.
That's really I'm broken. I've broken multiple bones, clavicle, femur, the whole 9 yards. They definitely, as many times as I've broken my back, they'd like to hand me hydrocodone and stuff like that. Anytime when I break my femur and I take myself off a Demerol drip after 12 hours, the doctor thinks I'm one of the craziest people he's ever met in his life.
Right.
Really does. Each person uses it for its own thing.
Right.
You talk about it fighting the chemo and the effects of that and stuff
The
like
nausea,
that.
right.
He might even believe, and I truly believe, that it fights it at a molecular level.
Sure.
It is one of the few things that will cross the blood barrier in the brain. It is a fat-based substance which allows it to travel anywhere in the body. It meets all these standards that these drugs cannot meet. It is not a narcotic. There's no known level of death.
So you would think with all this attention on opioids right now and just the abuse of those and just the problem in some of our borders, many states with young people getting caught up in heroin and
or compared to
opiates.
alcohol, there's no restrictions on alcohol.
You would think, but wouldn't you think that the belief is okay? Well, now medicinal marijuana. Now this is a nice alternative.
It is changing, but we got 28 states. That's surprising where you can get it. But
is that more than you would have thought?
It's a revolution in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so there's actually this weird little loophole in the Constitution that once so many states in the Union concede it into their own law, it has to be federal law.
Right.
And we're reaching that threshold very quickly.
Right.
We are a discussion that comes up more and more every day. We are a conversation that becomes more and more comfortable every day.
Sure.
In
these states, you got 28 states where recreational or medical have been passed by the voters. And I think a majority of Americans think it should
Florida did it by 71%.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing, though, because it still carries the stigma, and it's lessening.
Of
no
reefer
question
madness.
Reefer madness of reefer guy or whatever, reefer man.
Well, it's a gateway drug to, to all of the stereotypes of it.
No, it's interesting.
Let me ask you this. Let me switch gears a little bit.
Yes, sir.
There are all of these strains and of product that are targeting things. Is there some research facility that is genetically modifying cannabis and making the research known so you can figure out so that everybody can have similar kinds of products?
Some other countries are doing the research that are not really letting be known. The University of Mississippi, as far as I know, has grown cannabis in the United States for over 50 years. So the research, I think, is out there and might not be as disclosed as other people would like it.
So how do you come up with your strains then for your patients?
I do some homework. We actually look to the bigger states for those a lot of the time, where you can go into Washington, you can have 50 or 60 strains at their disposal when we're only allowed to grow 50, 60 plants when we have this many patients, Right. So we can actually look to people like them that have the better laws and are able to really test the waters a little more.
And you can see, because as I recall when I was at the dispensary, on the different products, they have what the composition is.
Correct. And then
how much PCP or how much...
Yeah, there's THC, CBDs. There are percentages of them. Depending on what you're liking and what you like feeling, you will look for the certain aspects and the certain numbers to lean one way or another, depending on your own personal needs.
Well, as I said earlier, what I found so surprising was in one of the dispensaries in Walla Walla, Washington, they had a chart on the wall that had what ailments you might be suffering from and you go across and it said which particular product they had in stock
right,
that could respond to that ailment.
And that's incredible. And I think having people behind the desk that know that,
so.
Cannabis counselors,
correct,
as they call them.
Correct. Like I like this. I prefer heavy indicas. I noticed you don't have my strain in today. What would you recommend? To have somebody behind the counter that knows what's going on, knows what should be coming back to you, is what keeps some dispensaries open better than others.
Well, it's like the old pharmacies. That's why we used to go to
apothecary.
See your pharmacist and say, I have a horrible cold. What should I take? Or or I
take a hit of this.
Yeah,
and seriously, now that's where some of these generations still remember that. They actually remember before pharmaceuticals, before reefer madness, that there was this dude that used to just mix some stuff in a jar and hand you some
I worked
stuff.
at a pharmacy. My first job in high school was a pharmacy. It was incredible. The Morton Pestle.
One for you, one for me.
It was very regulated then. We used it for a lot of other things. But anyway, Dylan, help me understand something. What's your background? I know you said you got into this by accident, but where are you from? Furnish us with some details. Who are you?
I'm a construction worker and a salesman.
Sales?
Yeah, I've actually ran a couple of stereo stores for some people. I've sold stuff locally. I feel like Missoula, Missoula as a community is a really wonderful place. So at one point in time,
it is.
I met this wonderful lady, and she was like, "Hey, this is federally illegal, and I totally support you in your adventure, but you have to have other hobbies." And so we do construction, and we do some other stuff.
What is that killjoy? No.
Right? But that's where it all came from. It actually come from being broken, from being in pain, from actually knowing what cannabis is long before I ever knew I was using it for medical uses. That's the craziest part. Like, I didn't realize I was using it for medical uses until my friend one day is like, "Dude, you're already medically using cannabis. Like, you."
Sure.
Yeah.
This is what you're doing. You're already the most broken person I know. Like, please help me, help you, help me.
Well, I'm fascinated. I think you're a very clear communicator about what's going on, which I think is helpful, right? Like, people like you need a voice. You need an opportunity to reach your audience.
Well, 50% of the people in the country have tried it. I mean, that's 150
Bill
million
Clinton
people.
tried it. He didn't inhale.
150 million people have tried it.
And so I would say all those people probably know that it's not bad, because you'll have that many people voting straight up for it. On top of the other 20%, they're like, I don't know, but I think these people should be good with what they have.
I think you make a good point earlier, Scott. Almost every characterization of the use of marijuana that's ever been in the media has been the negative. It's Cheech and Chong being completely stoned. It's selling Girl Scout cookies. With putting it in front of a dispensary. It's all of the humorous and recreational use of it. I've never seen a show that's talked about or a representation of it where say you can take this because you have Parkinson's disease and it'll make you feel better.
I think right now it's even you're an office man. You do this. You have a high stress life. You have high anxiety. You deal with a lot of stuff throughout your day. You have to come home and take a Valium, or you have to come home and take a Loratab because your feet hurt too bad. You have to come home and take some sort of stuff with some side effects. Makes you wake up, feel bad, makes your insides feel bad.
Right. Every one of the legislators who opposes this goes home
and does something.
And they drink or they take pills or they, and I'm not criticizing them for it, but it's a hypocritical double standard.
Sure.
Very double standard. And for them to not listen to us or even think about us, I feel like they almost, at that point in time, it's very disrespectful. Right. You're not considered a person. We're all in the same group. We're all going towards the same goal. Like, we should all be able to go to work and be happy at the end of the day.
When I was at one of the dispensaries, I was talking to the cannabis counselor, and she said they had patches. And I said, well, who buys these? She says, well, a lot of truck drivers buy them because they have tremendous back pain. Mm-hmm. And the composition of this doesn't give you a head high.
Correct.
It just gives you a local. It's almost like a localized anesthetic for their back and their ailments. I mean, I could never imagine being across the country truck driver sitting for hour after hour after hour in a truck.
And would you rather have him that patch on, or would you rather have him be bombed out on a Loratab?
No, rather have them with the patch, for
Right,
sure.
local and clear-headed.
Or having a couple of drinks and then driving.
Which happens
semi.
too.
And it happens all the time. We usually find those people in the river.
Right. I mean, train conductors, other people,
Right.
Again, listeners might say, oh, my God, they're going to be stoned. This is stoned in a completely different way.
When you've brought up a good point,
Yeah.
Arnie, like you can get it without the stoned anymore. You
Right.
can get the relaxation, you can get the hunger from it, you can get the nausea relief from it, and you can get all that without the head high these days. Like you can
That's how
specifically
specialized it is.
The
It's
problem is
amazing.
big pharma. Unless they can make a buck, they're going to push this down because
and it's kind of crazy because like there's a double-edged sword with the cannabis. In a male aspect of it, we like the female because we like the flowers. We like everything to have no seeds and to have purity to it.
right.
There's a male plant, and it kind of turns into some hemp, and it creates a lot of other problems and a lot of other waves on a lot of other fronts. Just now that some of these states are legalizing recreational use, they're going to start legalizing being able to grow the hemp. I truly believe when this all came about, Henry Anslinger got kind of bored, didn't have a job anymore. That was definitely part of it. That's a lot where the reefer madness came from. All of these legislatures believe in what they believe in due to dollars that come into their pockets.
Right.
A lot of these dollars, I think back then, there wasn't big pharma. There wasn't big anything. There's big industry that's all cotton. It's all industrial revolutionary stuff. And we're going to mess up the industrial revolution by letting hemp take over all these machines we just made.
I am learning about from some investment folks that there are businesses in Washington and Colorado, but more so Washington, that are run by people from former Fortune 500 companies. They're synthesizing the cannabis into crude oil, right? Because it's easy.
Yeah.
To
Well, hemp itself has many
right, but it's
uses.
incredible. It's like they don't even care about weed.
Right.
It's about how can I synthesize this down into the most transportable type of media,
Correct.
right?
And they're making a CBD oil, which
Right.
actually loopholes the DEA because THC is the part that's illegal in cannabis.
Oh,
And so you'll see
to remove.
So you see this stuff can be transported anywhere. It can be done anywhere until they actually determine CBDs itself and this actual backside of this to be a Schedule 1 or DEA.
So what would the use of that be without the THC?
That's where you get the no head high. It's a big MMA. It's a big MMA thing right now. So like the MMA fighters are using them.
Interesting.
Not the best tasting, not the best everything. It doesn't get all the full effects of it, but it's totally helping them heal their pain without using
Removes
any kind
the pain.
Right.
Let's do a quick ID and we'll be back with our final segment. You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, brought to us in part by Don Maddox, Glacier Sotheby's International Realty. Back after this. All right, we are back with our final segment with Dylan Matteson.
So, Dylan, you're running a business. Let's talk about this from a business perspective. How many employees do you have?
Right now we have one.
Just one employee. You can do this with one employee. In the future, as things unfold,
At one point in time when we were able to be in business, we had 4 employees.
4 employees. And so, are you going to expand your business? Is that your hope and plan as things stabilize here?
This round, I would like to expand a little bit. We definitely made sure we kept a small profile due to legislation bumps along the whole way. I definitely don't feel like full investing in something that could be swept out from underneath you at any point in time
Sure.
is the smartest business
You
decision.
got to
but
minimize your exposure for sure.
as soon as they tell us you're going to be effed, we definitely start saving all of our pennies
Right.
to make sure that we can keep where we're at for
Right.
the extent that we had. It actually came down to the very last minute. We were going to have to pack up and go home, or
Right.
we were going to be able to stay open
Right.
based on us having our
Well,
last
would you go
dollars.
ahead and open multiple locations around the state, or are you going to be a Missoula homeboy?
I will be a Missoula homeboy. I think that people everywhere should probably try to stick to that method of the madness. Once you get to be large enough to end up on people's lists, you don't want to be the top 10 or the bottom 10 of any crowd in most instances.
Sure, and that's a smart rule.
When are you going to start? When will you be able to start serving more than 3 patients?
We were actually, Judge Reynolds decided we were allowed to do that about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And so at that point in time,
Is that retroactive or?
to a certain extent, you can't really call it retroactive, but he's like, it happens right now. And so everybody else
So somebody with a medical marijuana card can now walk into your dispensary and get product from you.
Well, he has to be chosen as the dispensary. It has to be
so
done
you
in
can
advance.
come into me tomorrow and say, this is this and this is that, and I would like to be this based on liking your scenario.
Right.
I would like to be part of your group. And then we can sign up a piece of paper. We have to send it to DPHHS in Helena. And then once their card comes back with our name on it, we're allowed to serve them.
Right.
Okay.
So there's still some loopholes in this.
Is that the way you think it's going to continue to be in the future?
I hope not. I think
Okay.
It's
rules
not very
and
consumer friendly.
I think rules and regulations and the people that have been running this and had to really DPHHS got stuck with it.
Sure. Well, let me give you my tip on this.
Yes, sir.
If the governor is talking about taxing it, they're talking about expanding it and
That's good.
routinizing it and making it in the eyes of the state a legitimate business operation.
Because they want to go recreational, right?
Well, I think not only that, but if you're going to put in together a whole regulatory taxing environment on the industry, the expectation is it's going to last, it's going to be here, and it's going to grow. They're not going to do it just because there's 1,000 people participating.
And we should be able to bank with somebody besides the Native Americans.
That's right.
Right.
There's a lot of private tribes that are like, you know what? We don't care about the banks. We're our own entity. We'll fund you guys. You guys want to use our bank? Come use our bank. That's the biggest deal I think right now. Because same thing. If they're going to tax us, we have to be able to put our money in a bank.
Right.
You don't want us coming down to the state building with
consumers want to use credit cards.
Well, it's like it's going to eventually evolve to be more like Colorado and Washington State and Oregon and places like that, where it's a legitimate business. It's being taxed. It's being regulated.
Right.
It's being inspected. And it's not a shady behind the scenes kind of deal where you don't know from day to day what the story is.
12 years after we voted it in. It's
12 years.
It's a very good feeling. It gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
That's
and I
amazing.
think the crowning situation or issue is the conversation about taxation. That means it's being discussed as a legitimate.
What do you think is going to happen on the federal level?
Well, I think at some point, I think Dylan is right. When a majority of the states have it as in fact, the state law, and it's available for sale, it becomes at a point where someone files a suit to make it a federal program or federally acceptable.
Right, and not on the ban. Right.
And then the feds
and you got big pharma that's already buying land.
Right.
So they're buying land, but that's about the extent of their involvement. They're not getting involved in anything else.
You
Because
can't.
they're highly regulated as is.
Correct. And I think the people that will actually be the most successful in this adventure, once it does go completely federal, would probably be the bigger people like Philip Morris and stuff like that, who will capitalize and also have been buying huge chunks of property as this is evolving.
They'll stop growing tobacco and start growing cannabis.
Why do they own hundreds and hundreds of acres that they're not growing tobacco on right
And let's
now?
face it, if it was legal across the country, forget it, it's a federal. If it's legal across the country and states are imposing taxes, the feds would probably end up imposing taxes like they do on gasoline and other things, and look how much revenue it's going to generate.
Another conversation.
This is all about the Benjamins.
It's all about
ultimately.
You want to bail the country out of debt? Legalize cannabis. We've said it for 20 years.
They're also talking about legalizing and trying to use things like MDMA and ecstasy to treat certain disorders.
Right. Well, I think that'll be harder to do, but the cannabis piece.
I think they should at least be able to study it. Like you should be able to have. Okay, this college has gotten permission from the federal government and the DEA to uphold this study for this amount of years, and based on this grant, can do this and that. They can do it with everything else. They should be able to do it with
ecstasy.
Has
recreational drug of any kind.
Has the state had a referendum recently where it got turned down, where marijuana got turned down? I don't remember where one being defeated.
Mm-mm.
Nothing that made major law. It was always states that you wouldn't expect. Dakotas, Wyoming, places like that where like they don't quite make it.
Right.
But right now you have Bible Belt.
States that
are jumping on board. And it's like you said, even if they're not medical, they're decriminalizing it.
Sure.
We do not need people filling up the penitentiaries.
Right. This has nothing to do with blue or red states.
Right.
Alaska is a good example. it's
This
legal.
knows no partisanship.
It doesn't. It's America, and it's ready for America to be.
It
Right,
started
this is not
with-
Easy Rider. This is the Easy Rider is long gone.
Alcohol, bootleggers of alcohol, bootleggers of cable television, bootleggers of weed.
Well, right now,
I mean-
that's like one of the few bootleggings you have left.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you have people, I'm sure, that are running hard drugs all over God's creation too, but like that's one of the big bootlegs that you have left. You have Washington 2 hours from here. What's stopping anybody from crossing a little stretch of Idaho?
Right.
Go get, and that's where, to me, it's frustrating for the legislation to frown on us. Like, this is dollars.
What's
You see
going
the
on? You were
dollars.
just in Canada. What's the story up there?
They're gonna. It's legal for medical use, and there's a referendum for next year for it to be legal nationwide as recreationally.
There are boards that are already sitting on pre-creating rules for Canada. Canada will be a full medical country.
Well, on that note,
Note.
we'll say goodbye today.
Dylan Matteson, who operates Olympus Incendias.
Great guest.
Great guest. Thank you for educating and informing us as to the situation in our state, and appreciate your coming by, and have a happy holiday.
Thank you, boys.
Yeah, have a happy holiday, Dylan. Thank you so much. Arnie, I'll see you next week.
Yeah, take care, Scott. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 1015 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.